Have you ever wondered what a single moment of kindness could truly change? What if I told you that a worn plastic ball and a desperate child's plea would unlock a secret that had been buried for decades? This isn't just a story about charity. This is about destiny, about connections we never see coming, and about how the universe sometimes works in the most heartbreaking and beautiful ways imaginable. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about coincidence. So before we begin, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now, because this story deserves to be shared with everyone you know. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this one don't come around every day. And I promise you, if you stay until the end, you'll understand why this encounter was never really random at all. Before we continue, please tell us where you're watching us from. We love seeing the reach of our stories. Tommy's small fingers clutched the colorful plastic ball like it was made of gold. To anyone else walking down that busy downtown street, it was just a cheap toy. The kind you'd find in a dollar store bargain bin, faded and cracked from years of play. But to 7-year-old Tommy, it was everything. It was his companion on lonely nights when hunger kept him awake. It was his only friend when other kids at the shelter wouldn't play with him, because his clothes were too dirty. It was the last birthday present his mother Rachel had managed to buy him 2 years ago, back when she still had a job, back when they still had an apartment, back when life hadn't completely fallen apart. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the cold concrete as Tommy positioned himself on the corner of 5th and Madison, a spot he'd carefully chosen because it had the most foot traffic. His stomach growled so loudly it hurt, a hollow ache that had become his constant companion over the past 3 days. 3 days since they'd eaten anything more than the stale crackers someone had donated to the shelter. 3 days since his mother Rachel had been too weak to even stand up from their cot in the crowded room they shared with 15 other homeless families. Tommy remembered the conversation from last night, whispered in the darkness while other people snored and coughed around them. "Baby, I'm so sorry," Rachel had said, her voice cracking with shame and exhaustion. Her hand, once soft and gentle, now felt thin and bony as it stroked his hair. "Mommy's going to figure something out tomorrow, I promise. We just need to hold on a little longer." But Tommy had seen the fear in her eyes, the same fear he'd been seeing for months now. He knew his mother was sick. He didn't understand all the medical words the free clinic doctor had used, but he understood enough. His mommy needed medicine. His mommy needed food. His mommy needed help that Tommy didn't know how to get. That's when the idea had come to him, a desperate child's logic that made perfect sense in his innocent mind. If mommy couldn't work because she was too sick, and if they had no money for food, then maybe he could help. He had something valuable, didn't he? His ball. Someone would want to buy it. Someone would give him money for it. Maybe enough money to buy his mommy some soup, or bread, or even one of those apples he'd seen in the grocery store window that made his mouth water every time they walked past. He'd left before dawn, while Rachel was still sleeping, carefully tucking the thin blanket around her shivering body. He'd kissed her forehead, the way she always kissed his, and whispered, "I'm going to help us, Mommy. I'm going to be brave like you taught me." Then he'd grabbed his precious ball and slipped out into the cold morning streets, determination burning in his chest despite the fear that made his hands shake. Now, standing on this corner as the city came alive around him, Tommy held up his ball to every person who passed. "Excuse me, sir," he'd say to the men in business suits who rushed past without looking down. "Ma'am, please," he'd plead to the women who clutched their purses tighter and quickened their pace. "It's a really good ball. It bounces high. Please, my mommy needs to eat." But nobody stopped. Nobody even slowed down. They walked around him like he was invisible, like he was just another piece of trash on the sidewalk that you step over without thinking twice. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun climbed higher, and with it came more people, an endless river of humanity that flowed past this small boy with his outstretched arms and his desperate eyes. Some people glanced at him with pity before looking away quickly, as if poverty might be contagious. Others frowned with annoyance, probably thinking he was part of some scam, that his parents had sent him out here to beg. A few even told him to go away, to stop bothering people, to get a job, as if a 7-year-old child could do anything other than what he was doing. Tommy's arms began to ache from holding the ball up for so long. His legs trembled with exhaustion and hunger. But he didn't give up. He couldn't give up. Every time he thought about sitting down, about going back to the shelter empty-handed, he saw his mother's pale face in his mind. He heard her stomach growling in the night. He remembered how she'd given him her portion of crackers yesterday, claiming she wasn't hungry when he knew she was starving. "For Mommy," he whispered to himself. a mantra that kept him standing even when everything hurt. I have to do this for Mommy. It was approaching noon when something changed. The crowds had thinned slightly as people settled into their offices and shops, and Tommy was considering moving to a different corner when he heard the distinctive sound of expensive leather shoes clicking against the pavement. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. Walking toward him was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of one of those magazines Tommy sometimes saw in trash cans. The man wore a suit that probably cost more than everything Tommy's family had ever owned combined. His watch caught the sunlight and sparkled like diamonds. His shoes were so shiny Tommy could almost see his reflection in them. This was it. This was the person who would help. This man clearly had money. Surely he could spare something for a hungry child. Tommy's heart began to race as he stepped directly into the man's path, holding up his ball with both hands, his voice stronger now with desperate hope. Please, sir, please help. My mommy needs to eat and I'm selling my ball. It's my favorite thing, but I'll give it to you. Please, sir. Just $1. Anything you can give me. Please help Mommy eat by buying my plastic ball. David Blackwell had been thinking about the merger. The Henderson deal was supposed to close today, and there were still loose ends to tie up before the board meeting at 2 o'clock. His mind was running through numbers and negotiations, completely absorbed in the world of corporate finance that had consumed his life for the past 20 years. He barely registered the street around him, the way wealthy people often don't when they're walking through areas they consider beneath their notice. His driver had dropped him off 3 blocks from his office because of construction, and David was annoyed at having to walk among the common crowds. He almost didn't see the boy, almost stepped right around him the way he'd stepped around countless homeless people over the years. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the desperation in that small voice. Maybe it was the way the child's hands shook as he held up that pathetic plastic ball. Or maybe, though David wouldn't realize it until later, maybe it was something deeper. Something that had been calling to him across the years, pulling him toward this exact moment on this exact corner. David looked down, and for the first time in a very long time, he actually saw another human being. Really saw them. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, with tangled dark hair that hung in his eyes and clothes that were several sizes too big, probably donated from some charity bin. His face was smudged with dirt, but it was his eyes that hit David like a punch to the gut. Those eyes were too old for such a young face, filled with a kind of desperate hope that no child should have to carry. They were eyes that had seen too much suffering, too much disappointment, too much of the cruel indifference of the world. What did you say? David heard himself ask, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He was aware of people flowing around them, annoyed at the obstruction in the sidewalk, but he didn't move. Something had rooted him to this spot. Tommy's eyes widened with hope so intense it was almost painful to witness. My ball, sir. I'm selling my ball. It's really good. It bounces really high, and it's got all these pretty colors. See? He held it up higher, his thin arms trembling with the effort. My mommy, she's sick, and we don't have food, and I thought maybe if I could sell my ball, I could buy her something to eat. Please, sir. It's my favorite thing in the whole world, but Mommy's more important. Please help Mommy eat by buying my plastic ball. Something cracked open inside David's chest, something that had been frozen solid for more years than he could remember. He stared at this child, at the worn toy, at the desperate plea in those 2 old eyes, and suddenly he wasn't standing on 5th and Madison anymore. Suddenly he was 8 years old again, standing in a different city on a different corner, holding up his own worn possession, a small wooden car his father had made before he died. He could hear his own child's voice echoing across the decades. Please help my grandma. We need food. I'll sell you my car. Please, mister, please. The memory hit him so hard he actually stumbled backward. His grandmother Margaret, the woman who'd raised him after his parents died in that car accident. The tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that never worked right. The days when they'd had nothing to eat except whatever he could earn, or she could find. He'd been this boy. He'd stood on a corner just like this one, selling his most precious possession because his grandmother was too proud to beg and too sick to work. He remembered the shame, the fear, the desperate hope that someone, anyone, would see him as a human being worthy of help. But that wasn't what made David's blood run cold. It was something else. Something in the way the boy looked at him. Something in the shape of his face. David found himself asking the question before he'd consciously formed the thought. What's your name, son? Tommy, sir. Tommy Mitchell. Please. Will you buy my ball? Mitchell. The name hung in the air between them like a ghost. David's mind was racing now, calculating, remembering, connecting dots he'd never wanted to connect. And your mother's name? What's your mother's name? Tommy looked confused by the question, probably wondering why this rich man cared about names when all that mattered was whether he'd buy the ball. But desperate hope made him answer. Rachel, sir. Rachel Mitchell. She's real pretty, even though she's sick now. She used to work at the diner on 3rd Street before she got sick. Do you know her? David Blackwell's world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the city faded to a distant hum. The crowd disappeared. Everything narrowed down to this one moment, this one impossible truth that was reshaping his entire understanding of his life. Rachel Mitchell. He hadn't heard that name in 8 years. 8 years since he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. 8 years since he'd walked away from the only woman who'd ever seen past his money to the man he really was. "Oh my God," David whispered, and the words felt like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside his chest. "Oh my God, you're Rachel's son." Tommy nodded eagerly, misunderstanding the horror in David's voice for recognition. "Yes, sir. Do you know my mommy? Can you help us? She's really sick and we don't have any food, and I just want to help her. Please, sir, please." But David wasn't really hearing him anymore. His mind had catapulted backward 8 years, to a time when his life had briefly contained something other than boardrooms and profit margins. He'd met Rachel at a charity gala, of all places. She'd been working as a caterer, one of the staff people who were supposed to be invisible. But David had seen her. Really seen her. She'd had this light in her eyes, this warmth that had been missing from his cold, calculated world. They'd talked that night, away from the other guests, just a rich man and a working woman discovering they had more in common than either had expected. For 6 months, David had lived a double life. By day, he was David Blackwell, ruthless corporate shark, the man who'd built an empire on the ruins of his competitors' failures. By night, he was just David, the man who'd fallen hopelessly in love with a woman who didn't care about his money, who'd loved him for the person he'd almost forgotten he could be. Rachel had known about his wealth, of course. You couldn't date David Blackwell and not know. But she'd never asked him for anything. She'd worked her multiple jobs, lived in her small apartment, and loved him with a purity that terrified him because he'd never experienced anything like it. Then came the day his board had presented him with an ultimatum. There was a scandal brewing. Some tabloid had gotten photos of him with Rachel, and the board was concerned about image. "She's not our class, David," the chairman had said. "This relationship is a liability. You're about to close the biggest deal of your career. Do you really want to risk everything for some waitress?" They'd given him a choice. End it with Rachel, or lose his position as CEO. Lose everything he'd spent 20 years building. David had chosen his career. He'd convinced himself it was the practical choice, the rational choice. He'd told himself that love was a luxury he couldn't afford, that Rachel would understand, that she'd be fine. He'd ended it over the phone because he was too much of a coward to face her in person. He could still remember her silence on the other end of the line. The way she'd simply said, "I understand," in a voice so hollow it had haunted his dreams for months afterward. He'd never called her again. He'd blocked her number, avoided any place he might run into her, and buried himself in work until the pain had numbed to a dull ache he could mostly ignore. But now, looking down at this small boy with Rachel's eyes, David felt that pain rip open fresh and raw. The calculations his mind was doing were brutal and precise. 8 years ago, he'd walked away. 7 years ago, Rachel would have been pregnant. This boy was 7 years old. 7 years old with dark hair like David's hair. 7 years old with that same stubborn set to his jaw that David saw every morning in the mirror. 7 years old, and Rachel had never once tried to contact him. Never once asked for help. Never once told him he had a son. "Where is she?" David's voice came out strangled. "Where is your mother right now, Tommy?" "She's at the shelter, sir. The big one on 7th Street. She's sleeping because she's too sick to get up. That's why I came here by myself. I wanted to help her. I wanted to make her proud." Tommy's voice cracked, and tears started rolling down his dirty cheeks. "Please, sir, I don't know you, but you seem nice, and you're asking about Mommy. So maybe you can help. Please. She needs medicine and food, and I don't know what else. But the doctors at the free clinic said she needs things we can't afford. Please help Mommy eat by buying my plastic ball, please." David Blackwell, the man who'd made billion-dollar decisions without flinching, who'd destroyed companies and rebuilt them on a whim, who prided himself on never letting emotions interfere with business, found himself on his knees on a dirty sidewalk. He pulled this small boy into his arms, this child who might be his son, this innocent victim of David's cowardice, and he felt something breaking inside his chest. All the walls he'd built, All the armor he'd worn, all the cold calculation that had protected his heart for 8 years, it all crumbled in that moment. "I'm so sorry," David whispered into Tommy's hair, and he wasn't sure if he was talking to the boy, or to Rachel, or to himself. "I'm so sorry. You don't have to sell your ball, Tommy. You never have to sell your ball." Tommy pulled back, confused, but still hopeful. "So you'll help? You'll help my mommy?" David looked into those eyes that might be his eyes, and he knew with absolute certainty that nothing in his life had led to this moment by accident. Every choice, every mistake, every cold calculation had brought him to this corner, to this boy, to this chance at redemption he didn't deserve but was being offered anyway. "Yes," he said, his voice stronger now, filled with a determination that came from somewhere deeper than business strategy, deeper than survival instinct. "Yes, Tommy. I'm going to help your mommy. I'm going to help both of you. I promise you that." He stood up, pulled out his phone, and started making calls. First to his assistant. "Cancel everything today. Everything. I don't care what it is." Then to his personal physician. "I need you at the shelter on 7th Street in 15 minutes. Bring a full medical team." Then to his lawyer. "I need you to arrange immediate housing for 2 people. Actually, make it 3 people. The best apartment we can find, available today." His hands were shaking as he made each call, his mind racing ahead to everything that needed to be done, all the mistakes that needed to be fixed, all the time that had been wasted. Tommy was staring up at him with wonder now, the plastic ball forgotten in his hands. "Are you an angel? Mommy says angels help people who really need it." David almost laughed, but it came out more like a sob. An angel. This child thought he was an angel, when David knew he was anything but. He was the man who'd abandoned this boy's mother when she needed him most. He was the coward who'd chosen money over love. He was the villain of this story, not the hero. But maybe, just maybe, he could write a different ending. "No, buddy. I'm not an angel. I'm just a man who made a terrible mistake a long time ago, and I'm trying to fix it now." He held out his hand. "Come on, let's go see your mom." They walked together through the streets, this millionaire in his expensive suit and this homeless boy clutching his plastic ball. And David was aware of the stares, the whispers, the confusion on people's faces. Let them stare. Let them wonder. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was the small hand clutching his, trusting him completely despite having just met him, and the woman waiting at a shelter who had suffered alone for 7 years because of David's cowardice. The shelter on 7th Street was exactly as grim as David had imagined. The lobby smelled of industrial cleaner, failing to mask less pleasant odors. The walls were painted that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to crush hope. A tired-looking volunteer sat behind a desk, eyeing David's expensive suit with suspicion. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Rachel Mitchell," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. The volunteer glanced at Tommy, then back at David. "Family only." "I'm family," David said, and he realized as he said it that he meant it. He might not have been there, might not have earned the right to claim that title, but he was claiming it anyway. "Please, I need to see her now." Something in his voice must have convinced the volunteer because she nodded and gestured toward a hallway. "Third door on the right. But she's pretty sick, so don't upset her. Don't upset her." As if David could possibly do more damage than he'd already done. He followed Tommy down the hallway, each step feeling like walking through his own personal hell. What would he say? How could he possibly explain? How could he look her in the eyes after 8 years of silence? Tommy pushed open the door to a room that was barely bigger than a closet, lined with cots so close together you could barely walk between them. Rachel was on a cot in the corner, curled on her side under a thin blanket. Even from the doorway, David could see how thin she'd become, how pale, how the sickness had ravaged what had once been a vibrant, beautiful woman. His heart clenched so hard it physically hurt. "Mommy!" Tommy ran to her side, and Rachel stirred, turning slowly. "Mommy, I did it. I found someone to help us. I sold my ball to a nice man, and he's going to help us." Rachel's eyes opened, confused and groggy with fever. Then she looked up and saw David standing in the doorway, and the world seemed to stop spinning. Every emotion David had ever seen in another human being flashed across her face in the span of seconds. Shock, disbelief, recognition, hope, and then something that hurt worse than anything else. A desperate kind of shame that no one should have to feel. "David?" Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked and weak. "David, is that really you?" He couldn't speak. He couldn't make his throat work around the sob that was threatening to tear out of him. He just nodded and stepped into the room, moving carefully around the other cots until he was kneeling beside hers. Up close, he could see the full extent of what his abandonment had cost her. The dark circles under her eyes, the way her collarbone jutted out from malnutrition, the fever flush on her cheeks, the defeat in her eyes that no amount of love for her son could completely hide. "Rachel, he started. But what could he say? What words existed that could bridge 8 years of silence and suffering? "Mommy, do you know him?" Tommy was looking between them, confused but still excited. "He says he's going to help us. He called doctors and everything. Isn't that great?" Rachel's eyes never left David's face. She reached out with one thin hand and touched his cheek, as if checking to make sure he was real. "You came back," she whispered. "After all this time, you came back." "I didn't know," David said, and the words felt inadequate, pathetic. "Rachel, I swear to you, I didn't know about Tommy. I didn't know you needed help. I didn't know you were suffering like this. If I had known, would it have mattered?" There was no accusation in her voice, just exhaustion. "You made your choice 8 years ago, David. You chose your career over us. Over me." Her hand dropped from his face. "Why are you here now?" "Because your son stopped me on a street corner and offered to sell me his most precious possession to help you," David said, his voice breaking. "Because I looked into his eyes and saw everything I walked away from. Because I was an idiot and a coward, and I've spent 8 years pretending that was the right choice when every single day I knew it wasn't. Because maybe I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm begging you for one anyway." Rachel closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her cheeks. "He's yours, you know, Tommy. He's your son. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you ended things. I almost called you 1,000 times, but I was so angry, so hurt. And then I thought, maybe it's better this way. Maybe my son deserves a father who chooses to be there, not one who has to be forced. So I raised him alone." She opened her eyes and looked at Tommy, who was watching them with wide, confused eyes. "And I did my best, David. I worked so hard, but then I got sick, and I lost my job, and everything just fell apart. I tried to protect him. I tried so hard." "You did protect him," David said fiercely. "Look at him, Rachel. Look at what you created. He's brave, he's kind, he's willing to sacrifice everything he has for the person he loves. He's perfect, and that's all because of you. You did that alone, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what you built." A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. David's doctor had arrived with a full medical team, equipment in hand, moving with the efficient precision of people used to dealing with emergencies. They swept into the room, and suddenly, everything was controlled chaos. Rachel was being examined, Tommy was being checked over, and David was answering questions about medical history he didn't know, making decisions about treatment plans, arranging for immediate transport to the best hospital in the city. Through it all, he kept one hand on Tommy's shoulder, grounding himself with this connection to his son. His son. The words kept echoing in his mind, reshaping his entire understanding of who he was and what his life meant. He had a son. He'd had a son for 7 years and hadn't known it. 7 years of birthdays missed. 7 years of first words and first steps and childhood wonder he'd never witnessed. 7 years of this boy growing up without a father, because David had been too much of a coward to fight for what mattered. The doctor approached him with a grave expression. "Mr. Blackwell, I won't lie to you. She's severely malnourished, dehydrated, and she's got an advanced case of pneumonia that's bordering on life-threatening. If you'd found her even a few days later..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. A few more days, and Tommy would have been alone in the world. "But you can help her?" David demanded. "Money is no object. Whatever she needs, whatever treatment, wherever we need to go. With proper medical care, nutrition, and time, yes, she should make a full recovery. But David, she's going to need support. Not just medical support, but emotional support. She's been through trauma. The body heals faster than the mind." David nodded. He understood trauma. He'd been running from his own for 20 years. "She'll have everything she needs. They both will. I promise you that." Within an hour, Rachel was being transferred to a private room at St. Vincent's Hospital, the kind of room reserved for people with excellent insurance or deep pockets. Tommy refused to leave her side, clutching that plastic ball in one hand and his mother's hand in the other. David followed them, feeling like an intruder in a family he'd helped create but had never been part of, yet knowing he would do whatever it took to earn his place. Over the next few days, as Rachel slowly regained her strength, the truth came out in pieces. David learned about her pregnancy, how she'd been terrified but also filled with joy, about losing her job when the morning sickness got too severe, About working whatever jobs she could find while raising a baby alone. About getting sick 6 months ago and spiraling into homelessness when she couldn't work anymore. About trying to shield Tommy from the worst of it, always making sure he ate even when she didn't. Always telling him everything would be okay even when she didn't believe it herself. And David shared his own truth. About growing up poor with his grandmother after his parents died. About clawing his way up through sheer determination and ruthlessness. About becoming so obsessed with never being poor again that he'd forgotten what actually mattered. About the board's ultimatum and his choice to walk away from Rachel. About the 8 years of emptiness he'd filled with work and money and meaningless achievements. I thought I was being smart. He admitted one night when Tommy had fallen asleep in the chair beside Rachel's bed. I thought I was being practical, but I was just being a coward. I was so afraid of being poor again that I threw away the only wealth that ever really mattered. Rachel was quiet for a long time, staring at their sleeping son. I was angry at you for so long, she finally said. I hated you for abandoning me, for choosing your precious career over love. But you know what the worst part was? Even after everything, I never stopped loving you. And every time I looked at Tommy, I saw you, and it hurt. But it also gave me strength, because I had this piece of you, this beautiful child who had your eyes and your stubborn determination, and I knew I had to protect him no matter what. I don't deserve your forgiveness, David said. I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Not just for me, but for Tommy. He deserves a father. He deserves a family. He deserves everything I should have given him from the beginning. It's not about what you deserve, David. It's about what you do now, today, tomorrow, every day after that. Rachel reached out and took his hand. Tommy stopped you on that street corner for a reason. Maybe it was chance, maybe it was fate, maybe it was just the universe's way of saying we all get second chances if we're willing to fight for them. But here we are. The question is, what are you going to do with this chance? David looked at his son, sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long, well-fed and safe and cared for. He looked at Rachel, color slowly returning to her cheeks, strength slowly rebuilding in her body. He looked at his own hands, hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, but had never changed a diaper, never tied a shoe, never tucked a child into bed. And he knew with absolute certainty what he was going to do. Everything, he said. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to be the father Tommy deserves. I'm going to be the man you should have had 8 years ago. I'm going to make up for every moment I missed, every birthday, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I wasn't there to bandage. It won't be easy, and I'm probably going to mess up more times than I get it right. But I swear to you, Rachel, I'm not walking away this time. Not ever again. The next morning, David called another board meeting. The same men who'd given him the ultimatum 8 years ago sat around the same conference table, ready to discuss quarterly profits and expansion strategies. David looked at them. These men he'd once thought held the keys to his success, and he realized how little they actually mattered. Gentlemen, he said, I'm resigning as CEO effective immediately. The shock in the room was palpable. The chairman half rose from his seat. David, you can't be serious. You've built this company. You are this company. No, David said calmly. I helped build this company. But companies can be rebuilt. Families can't. 8 years ago, you gave me a choice between my career and the woman I loved. I made the wrong choice. I'm not making that mistake again. This is about that waitress? The chairman's voice was incredulous. After all these years, you're throwing away everything for... Her name is Rachel, David interrupted, his voice cold. And that everything I'd be throwing away? It's nothing compared to what I already threw away. You're all welcome to try and stop me, but I promise you, you'll lose. I'm taking my shares, I'm liquidating my assets, and I'm walking out that door. You can find a new CEO. I'm going to be a father. He walked out of that boardroom and didn't look back. He spent the afternoon meeting with lawyers, setting up trust funds, arranging for long-term financial security for Rachel and Tommy. He bought a house, not a mansion, just a comfortable home in a good neighborhood with a big backyard where a boy could play. He hired the best tutors and enrolled Tommy in the best school. He arranged for Rachel to have the best medical care, the best rehabilitation, the best of everything that money could buy. But more importantly, he showed up. Every single day. He learned how to make Tommy's favorite breakfast. He learned how to help with homework, even though second-grade math was surprisingly complicated. He learned how to read bedtime stories with all the silly voices that made Tommy giggle. He learned how to comfort nightmares and celebrate small victories, and just be present in all the tiny moments that make up a life. It wasn't always smooth. Tommy was confused at first, unsure how to relate to this man who claimed to be his father but had never been there before. Rachel had moments of doubt, old hurts surfacing when she least expected them. David himself struggled with the guilt of 7 years lost, 7 years he could never get back. But they worked through it together, building something new from the broken pieces of what might have been. 6 months after that day on the corner, David and Rachel were married in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Tommy was the ring bearer, proudly carrying the rings on a small pillow, beaming with joy at seeing his parents together. The plastic ball sat on a shelf in their home, a reminder of the day everything changed, of the moment when a child's desperate love for his mother created a miracle that nobody could have predicted. A year after that, David stood in Tommy's room, tucking him into bed the way he'd done every night for the past year. Tommy clutched his plastic ball, the one he still refused to part with, even though he now had a room full of new toys. "Daddy?" he asked, using the title that still made David's heart swell every time he heard it. "Do you remember the day we met? When I tried to sell you my ball?" "Every single detail," David said honestly. "Why do you ask?" "I was thinking about it today, about how scared I was, and how hungry, and how nobody would help. And then you stopped. You were the only one who stopped." Tommy's eyes, so much like David's own, looked up at him with innocent wisdom. "Why did you stop, Daddy? All those other people just walked past, but you stopped. Why?" David thought about all the possible answers. About coincidence and fate. About guilt and redemption. About the mysterious ways the universe works to bring people together. But in the end, he gave Tommy the simplest truth. "Because I recognized you," he said. "Maybe not consciously at first, but somewhere deep inside, I recognized you. You were me, standing on that corner all those years ago, desperate and scared and hoping someone would see you as worthy of help. And I couldn't walk past myself. I couldn't abandon that little boy I used to be, not again." "I'm glad you stopped," Tommy said sleepily. "I'm glad you're my daddy." "I'm glad too, buddy. I'm glad too." David kissed his forehead and stood to leave, but Tommy's voice stopped him. "Daddy? The ball? What about it?" "I think I'm ready to put it away now, on the shelf with my other special things, because I don't need it anymore. I have everything I need right here." David felt tears prick his eyes. "You sure? That ball is pretty special." "It is special," Tommy agreed. "It brought you to us. But I don't need to hold on to it anymore because I'm not scared anymore. I know you're not going anywhere. You promised." "I promised," David confirmed. "And I keep my promises." The truth about that day on the corner, the truth that David would spend the rest of his life grateful for, was that sometimes the universe gives us exactly what we need at exactly the moment we need it, even if we don't deserve it. A child's desperate plea for help had saved 3 lives that day. It had saved Rachel from poverty and illness. It had saved Tommy from a childhood of struggle and uncertainty. But most of all, it had saved David from a life of empty success and hollow achievements, from becoming so consumed by wealth that he forgot what it meant to be wealthy in the ways that actually mattered. Years later, when Tommy was grown with children of his own, he would keep that plastic ball on his desk. People would ask him about it sometimes, this worn toy in such a prominent place, and he would tell them the story of a desperate boy, a plastic ball, and a millionaire who found redemption on a street corner. The story of how one moment of vulnerability, one plea for help, one person choosing to stop and truly see another human being, can change everything. Before we end this story, I want you to think about something. How many times have you walked past someone who needed help? How many times have you been too busy, too distracted, too consumed by your own life to stop and really see another person's suffering? David almost didn't stop. He almost walked right past his own son. But something made him pause, made him look, made him choose compassion over convenience. And that choice changed everything. So I'm asking you, if this story moved you, if it made you feel something, don't just click away. Hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because stories like this one matter, and they need to be told. And most importantly, the next time you see someone struggling, someone asking for help, someone trying their best in a situation you can't fully understand, stop. Just stop. Look at them. Really see them. Because you never know when that moment of compassion might save a life. You never know when that person might be you, or your child, or someone you love. We're all just one disaster away from needing help ourselves. David Blackwell learned that lesson the hard way. But he learned it. And because he did, because he chose to stop on that street corner, because he chose to see Tommy as a human being worthy of help, rather than an inconvenience to step around, 3 lives were transformed. A family was created. Love was given a second chance. And a worn plastic ball became a symbol of hope that would be treasured for generations. Sometimes the most valuable things in life cost nothing at all. Sometimes they're just about choosing to stop, to see, to care. Sometimes they're about recognizing ourselves and others and offering the help we once needed or might need someday. Sometimes they're about second chances and redemption and the belief that it's never too late to do the right thing. That's what Tommy's plastic ball taught them. That's what David learned when he finally stopped running from his past and started building his future. That's what Rachel knew all along, even in her darkest moments, even when she was alone and sick and scared. Love matters. Family matters. Being there matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe conspires to remind us of that in the most heartbreaking and beautiful ways possible.